I'm sure she fought.
That's
I have to believe that she fought.
What grandmother let this happen, or what neighbor, or what bus driver, or, where were all of you? Where were you,
This is the biggest step forward for solving crime since the discovery of DNA itself.
Some cases leave you with answers, but this one only leaves more questions. What if I told you that over the span of 35 years, investigators uncovered a web of crimes so tangled, so haunting, that even today, we might not know the full extent of its horrors? Multiple victims, each with their own heartbreaking story, all tied together by a single, sinister thread. It's a case that rewrote itself every time a new clue surfaced, forcing even the most seasoned detectives to start over again and again. Two barrels, found 15 years apart in 1985 and 2000, deep in the woods of Bear Brook State Park, New Hampshire. Each one held the remains of a woman and 3 young children. But that was just the beginning. As investigators worked to solve this mystery, they uncovered more victims far from this location, each revelation adding to the chilling puzzle. It wasn't until 2017, 32 years after the first discovery, that some identities were finally uncovered. Join me as we unravel the mysterious murders at Bear Brook State Park, where questions still linger and the shadows of the past refuse to fade. On November 10, 1985, a hunter ventured into Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. As he made his way through the woods, he encountered something unusual, a foul smell. Following the scent, he discovered a large, rusted 55-gallon metal barrel, partially buried beneath leaves and debris near the site of a burned-down store. Curiosity drove him to investigate further, and when he pried open the barrel, what he found sent chills down his spine. He called the cop on duty, Officer Mount Pleasure, who arrived at the scene, assuming it might be an animal killed by hunters, as it was hunting season. Upon reaching the woods, Mount went to the barrel alone, as the hunter was too terrified to accompany him. As he approached the barrel, he made a chilling discovery.
The barrel was on the ground, and there was a bag. And when I opened the bag, the decomposed face was looking right at me.
Inside the barrel were the remains of 2 individuals, an adult female and a young girl. Both were dismembered and wrapped in plastic, tied with electrical wire. Officer Mount quickly secured the area immediately surrounding the barrel, though covering a large area in the dense woods was impossible. The decomposing bodies were in advanced stages of decay. Experts estimated they had been in the barrel for months to a year, as the outline of the woman's face and the smaller body of the child were still faintly visible, though barely discernible. Investigators quickly began to examine the remains. The bodies were transported for autopsies, where it was determined that both victims had died from blunt force trauma to the head. There were no signs of gunshot wounds or stabbings, only the unmistakable marks of being struck by a heavy object. A composite sketch of the victims was released, though the artist had little to work with due to the advanced decomposition of the bodies. This was the first time any facial identities were given to the victims. In the sketch, the woman appeared to be between the ages of 23 and 33, standing 5 feet 2 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall, with wavy hair and a long, tired face. The child was estimated to be between 8 and 10 years old. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that uncovering the true identities of the victims would be an immense challenge. The bodies had been hidden in the barrel for an extended period, leaving investigators with little forensic evidence to work with. Despite efforts to use dental records and other identification methods, the names of the woman and child remained unknown. In the absence of answers, the 2 victims were buried after 2 years of investigation in an Allenstown cemetery. Officer Mount Pleasure remarked, "Just because we don't know their names doesn't mean they don't deserve the same respect as we do." A tombstone was placed over their grave, inscribed with the following: "Here lies the mortal remains known only to God of a woman aged 23 to 33, and a girl child aged 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10, 1985, in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care. Though the case would go quiet for over a decade, the discovery of these two bodies was just the beginning. What authorities could not have known at the time was that this gruesome discovery was part of a far larger and more sinister story that would take years to uncover. On May 9, 2000, nearly 15 years after the first barrel had been discovered, John Cody, a detective in the State Police Major Crime Unit, was assigned the Bear Brook case. However, since the case was already considered cold, he worked on it only during his free time from active investigations. On one of those days, he decided to visit Bear Brook State Park, where the first barrel had been found. It was then that the chilling mystery of the Bear Brook murders took another dark turn. Near a boulder, he discovered a second barrel, eerily similar to the first, a blue, 55-gallon drum. Flashing his light inside, he made a grim discovery.
And I tore the plastic away, and there was something white that was shining towards me. Kind of sticks out with the dark background. When I looked at it, I said, this does not look good.
2 more bodies. This time, the barrel was located just 300 feet away from where the first had been found. What was even more unsettling was that the second barrel had likely been there all along, ever since the first was discovered. Now, the most awkward question arose. Why had it taken investigators 15 years to find the second barrel? At first glance, the second barrel was difficult to spot. Despite being in close proximity to the original discovery site, investigators in 1985 had inexplicably missed it. It wasn't until 2000 that John Cody uncovered this second barrel. But why the delay? When asked this question by a reporter, a prosecutor from the New Hampshire Attorney General's office replied,
"It took 15 years to find the second oil drum. What happened there? It was only 300 feet away. Was it buried, or was it hidden, or was it just overlooked? It doesn't seem like it was that far away."
Well, I think if we were talking about an area that had more, let's say, bike trails, that was more marked, then I could certainly see your point on that. But with regards to this, it was 300 feet away. We're also talking about an area that's just heavily wooded, and quite frankly, I don't think that finding that second barrel any sooner would change the information that we have to present today.
According to investigators, the second barrel was located outside the immediate area of the first crime scene. The initial investigation had focused solely on the area around the first barrel, and the search perimeter did not extend far enough to include the site where the second barrel was found. Bear Brook State Park is New Hampshire's largest developed state park, sprawling over 10,000 acres. It features dense forests, wetlands, and marshes, making searches challenging. However, the location where the bodies were found was privately owned land belonging to a man named Ed Gallagher, situated at the edge of Bear Brook State Park. So, was the second barrel genuinely hard to find, or did authorities conveniently blur the lines between a small patch of private property and the park's sprawling 10,000 acres just to complicate things? Inside the second barrel were the remains of 2 young girls, aged 3 and 2. Their bodies, like the earlier victims, were wrapped in plastic. As investigators examined the scene, the similarities between the new discovery and the first were undeniable. The medical examiner determined that the young girls had been killed by blunt force trauma, struck with a heavy object, the same brutal method used on the victims in 1985. This brought the total number of victims to 4: a woman, the oldest child, the middle child, and now the youngest child. When the barrel was finally located, it became clear that the murders of the 2 young girls had occurred around the same time as the first barrel. The killer had left both sets of victims in similar conditions within a short time frame. This deepened the mystery. Who were these girls? Why were they murdered? And why had they been hidden in the same desolate area as the first victims? Forensic examination provided a mix of answers and questions. It confirmed that the oldest and youngest children were maternally related to the woman. However, the middle child's DNA did not match any of the other victims, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Despite the new discovery, the investigation hit a dead end once again. Like the first barrel, the victims' identities remained unknown, and there were no leads on the killer. The police found themselves back at square one, with more victims but no new evidence to piece the puzzle together. The discovery of the second barrel sent shockwaves through the community. Once again, the haunting question arose: who was responsible for these brutal murders? The two barrels, each containing the bodies of unknown victims, represented an unsolved riddle that had tormented authorities for years. Yet, as investigators continued their work, they had no idea that the case was about to take an unexpected and even darker turn. In November 2015, after 30 long years, New Hampshire state law enforcement held a press conference to share significant updates on the Bear Brook murders. Benjamin Agar, a prosecutor from the Cold Case Unit, stood behind the podium as the findings from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were presented. The team first revealed updated composite images of the victims along with detailed descriptions, aiming to provide a clearer representation of their appearances.
Our first one is our adult victim. She's a female, likely to be within her mid-20s. Our first child victim, also found in the same barrel with her. Her age is closer to 9 to 10 years old. She was approximately 4 feet 3 inches tall, had light brown, dirty blonde hair. We do not know what her weight was specifically, and we do not know her eye color. Child victim number 2, her age is anywhere between 2 to 4 years old. She had a dental overbite, and this has been remarked about before, that may be noticeable to others. The last child, she had a very large gap between the upper 2 front teeth. We are trying to get these images out there. Through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they have not had one single case like this, with 4 individual victims that have been unidentified for such a period of time.
Following this, Agare introduced the results of a groundbreaking radioisotope analysis conducted on the victims' bones, teeth, and hair. He explained that this testing provides insights into the environments where the victims had lived throughout their lives. For example, the isotopes in teeth reveal the environment a person was exposed to from birth, offering clues about their origin. Meanwhile, hair, which grows continuously, provides a timeline of a person's movement, detailing the locations they lived during the last few months of their lives. Agare elaborated further, referencing the use of lead isotope analysis. He stated that lead from gasoline released into the air by vehicles differs across countries because it originates from distinct mines. This unique signature allowed forensic experts to confirm that the victims were from North America. However, the ood out aligned with that of the other victims, raising the recurring question: where did she come from? George, a geologist who conducted the analysis, provided additional details. He stated that the related victims, the woman, the oldest girl, and the youngest girl, likely originated from areas spanning New England to West Virginia. In contrast, the middle child appeared to have come from a region between Vermont and New York. While this might not seem like the most groundbreaking discovery, it was the only significant new information in 3 decades.
What we saw was that the 3 victims that are related by DNA, they kind of have the same oxygen isotopic signal, which tells us that they were all living together. But then the 4th girl that was not related, she shows distinct oxygen isotopes, which tells us that she came from somewhere else.
The isotopic evidence also revealed that, in the last 2 to 3 months of their lives, all 4 victims had been together in the New England region. Hair samples, which offer a more recent timeline, confirmed this shared location during their final days.
Her hair showed that the last few months before death, she was living in the area. However, about 5 to 7 months before death, she went somewhere either to the north or to the west, to like a colder climate where the oxygen isotopes are lower. And what's interesting is that the unrelated victim, the 4th girl that is not related by DNA, her teeth also show these lighter oxygen isotopes. So one possible interpretation is that that's the time when the non-related girl joined the group.
This revelation, though limited, marked a critical step forward in the investigation of this haunting case. But before investigators reached that pivotal moment in 2015, something happened years earlier, in 1999, that would quietly push this case forward. It's a moment that at the time seemed small, but would later reveal itself to be a critical piece of the puzzle. In 1999, California, Eun Jun started dating a man and was preparing to introduce him to her family. Elaine, Eun-soon's cousin, came to the door to welcome them and described Eun-soon's boyfriend as,
First of all, when they drove up, it was in this dirty white van. It didn't have windows on it. It was one of those cargo vans. And I thought, wow. But then when they came up to the door and I opened the door and saw his face, I had a chill run down my back that I've never in my life ever had before. And he stuck out his hand to shake my hand, and I saw the long, dirty fingernails that just creeped me out.
Larry Vanner, Eun-soon's new boyfriend, looked old, partially bald, with patches of hair, and dirty, with a deep voice. Despite this, Elaine still welcomed them. Somewhere during the party, Elaine tried to talk to Larry Vanner about his past, like what he did, but he aggressively denied answering and then started acting normal again. After the party, some days later, Eun-soon called Elaine, asking what she thought of her new boyfriend, to which Elaine replied,
And I said, Eun-soon, I don't really know him. I tried to get to know him, but he didn't want to answer my questions. I go, please, before you get too involved with him, make sure everything he's telling you is the truth. Please do that for me. And then she got angry at me and she said, nobody wants me to be happy. I finally have found somebody who loves me and nobody wants me to be happy. And I said, that's not it. I just don't want you to get involved with somebody that isn't telling you the truth. And that was the last time I spoke with her.
After hearing this, Eun-soon got angry and cut the call, saying nobody in the family wanted her to be happy. She struggled with her love life in her 40s, and after all this, Eun-soon cut ties with her family and became completely secluded from them. After a while, Eun-soon and Larry married unofficially, but didn't invite her family to the wedding. However, Eun-soon remained in touch with her friend Rose. But now Rose was unable to contact Eun-soon for a while, because whenever she called, Larry would pick up the phone and start making excuses. This made Rose suspicious of Larry. When Larry began cutting the calls, annoyed and angry, Rose finally gave Larry a warning. She told him that if he didn't let Eun-soon talk to her, she would call the cops. To no surprise, she did call them. The case of missing Eun-soon was assigned to Officer Roxane. Soon, they took Larry Vanner in for questioning.
Maybe she hurt herself, and you're concerned about that getting out, that she's harmed herself.
No.
There's no truth.
If you're thinking, is she suicidal?
Yeah.
No, she's not.
She's not.
But she's not as aggressive as she used to be.
Mm-hmm.
During the interrogation, Larry didn't talk much aside from spewing nonsense or rambling about things unrelated to Eun-soon. At last, he said that Eun-soon had gone for therapy as she was going through a mental breakdown, but refused to give the name of the doctor or facility, claiming it would disturb her therapy if she received a call from the cops. The police ran Larry Vanner's name through their system, expecting to uncover some basic information, an ID, a driver's license, anything, but to their surprise, they found nothing. There were no records tied to the name Larry Vanner. This lack of identity instantly raised the officers' suspicions. Determined to uncover the truth, they decided to run Larry's fingerprints through their criminal history database. What they discovered opened an entirely new chapter of mysteries.
Your prints came back. You know your other name, right?
Curtis or Gerald or Jerry or whatever name you're going by this week.
Curtis Kimball.
Curtis Kimball. Or Gerald
Mockerman?
Mockerman, right.
Ring a bell?
No.
Yeah, that's who you are, man.
Why not?
The search brought up several aliases used by Larry in the past, including Curtis Kimball and Gerald Mockerman. These names were tied to a completely different set of crimes and a dark past that would unravel later. However, the police put those findings aside for now, focusing on solving Yoon Soon-jun's case first. With this new lead, the police rushed to Larry's house to conduct a search. During the search, they reached the garage where they noticed a door leading to a small, basement-like structure. Inside that structure, something immediately caught their attention: a massive pile of cat litter. The sheer size of the pile was abnormal, far beyond what any pet owner would reasonably need. This discovery raised red flags, and the officers called in forensic experts to investigate further. As the forensic team started digging through the cat litter, they uncovered a horrifying sight.
And within a few swipes of the pile, the thing that emerged was a human foot that was still in a like a rubber, like a flip-flop, but it was mummified. Like it was like you'd see like in a museum, like a mummified foot, human foot, obviously human foot.
The forensic team found blood splatter on the heating and air conditioning ductwork above the pile of cat litter. It suggested that Eun-soon had been bludgeoned to death.
They found the dismembered and bludgeoned body of Yoon Soon-jun. The gruesome discovery shocked everyone involved in the case. The police were able to connect Larry to the pile of cat litter after confirming he had purchased large quantities of it using Eun-soon's ATM card. In 2002, Larry Vanner was brought to trial for Yoon Soon-jun's murder. During the proceedings, Larry remained eerily calm, even smiling at Elaine, Eun-soon's cousin, when she was present in court. However, on the second day of the trial, Larry suddenly changed his plea to guilty and willingly accepted a 15-year prison sentence. This shift wasn't due to any genuine remorse for what he had done to Eun-soon. Instead, it became clear that Larry's decision was a calculated move. He wanted to close this case as quickly as possible to prevent Officer Roxane from digging further into his past. After Larry Vanner was sentenced to 15 years in 2002 for the murder of Yoon Soon-jun, Officer Roxane felt a strange sense of incompletion. Unlike most, she wasn't ready to close the chapter on this man.
I was sitting there at my cubicle, and I'm reading all of this stuff, and I felt like that now that I had not only my homicide case and who this guy was, but then there's all this backstory to him, and who the heck is this guy, really? And who's that little girl?
The aliases, Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Gerald Mockerman, kept nagging at her. What secrets lay buried in his past? Roxane knew she had to dig deeper. She started by tracing his criminal history under each alias. 1985, arrested for a DUI. This was the first time police had documented this man, though they suspected the name was fake. 1986, Gordon Jensen, arrested for child abandonment, an incident that would later connect to the gruesome Bear Brook murders. 1988, Gerald Mockerman, arrested for driving a stolen vehicle. Each name told a fragmented story, but it was the 1986 case under Gordon Jensen that stood out. This was no simple crime. This one had threads that stretched far beyond what anyone had imagined. In 1986, 15 years before Larry met Yoon Soon, he was living under the name Gordon Jensen in a trailer park in California. By his side was a little girl named Lisa, who he claimed was his daughter. Neighbors at the RV park, an elderly couple named the Deckers, quickly noticed something was wrong. Lisa was frail, poorly dressed, and had no toys, nothing that indicated she was being cared for. The Deckers, worried for Lisa, offered to have their own daughter adopt her. At first, Gordon seemed open to the idea, even allowing Lisa to spend time with the Deckers family. But then one day, he vanished. He left behind the trailer, his belongings, and Lisa. The Deckers, unable to adopt Lisa themselves, contacted the authorities. Lisa was taken into custody, but the mystery of her origins remained unsolved. 2 years later, in 1988, Gordon Jensen reappeared under a new alias, Gerald Mockerman, when he was arrested for driving a stolen vehicle. But this time, his fingerprints betrayed him. The police tied him to the 1986 case of child abandonment. To avoid further investigation, Larry struck a plea deal: 1.5 years in prison and 12 years of parole. After serving his short sentence, he violated parole and disappeared again. As Officer Roxane pieced together these stories, one question loomed over her. Was Lisa truly Larry's daughter? Something didn't add up.
Roxanne wanted to do a paternity test to know for sure. She had Kimball's DNA from her homicide investigation, and she learned that detectives investigating Lisa's abandonment had taken a blood sample from her back in the 80s. Roxanne convinced the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department to split the blood sample, which they still had, then they FedExed it to her in Contra Costa County. Roxanne ordered the paternity test as soon as it arrived.
I got the report back that was scientifically definitive, like, this person is not biologically related to this person. And I'm like, holy moly, you know what I mean? Like, this is crazy right now. Like, there's San Bernardino has like a live, like an Elizabeth Smart, or like who is she? Like, she's not Lisa. And I'm like, who is she?
It had taken almost 20 years since Lisa was abandoned for someone to find out that she was a living Jane Doe.
Convinced her hunch was right, Roxane pushed for a paternity test. The results were shocking. Larry was not Lisa's father. For over 20 years, Lisa had lived a life without any real identity. She wasn't Lisa. She wasn't anyone. Much like the Bear Brook victims, her true name and family were a mystery. Lisa, now 23, was just as determined to uncover her past as Roxane was. She revealed a chilling detail to Roxane. She remembered having siblings, but they had died after eating poisonous mushrooms. Yet, Lisa's memories were fragmented, and nothing concrete could be established. Desperate for answers, Roxane visited Larry in prison, but he offered nothing useful, only incoherent ramblings. The search for Lisa's identity seemed hopeless. In 2013, Lisa suggested a groundbreaking idea, using genealogy websites to trace her DNA. It was a novel approach. Such technology had never been used in a criminal investigation before. But it was their only hope. Investigators uploaded Lisa's DNA to these websites, hoping to find distant relatives. The results were overwhelming, 25,000 potential matches. It was a massive undertaking, especially in an era when genealogy databases were still in their infancy. With the help of volunteers, online detectives, and Lisa's distant cousins, the team began narrowing down the matches. After months of painstaking work, they found a breakthrough, a family that knew Lisa's mother. Lisa's real name was Dawn Bowden. Now she is 32 years old with 3 kids and a happy family. And now, after years of chasing shadows and unraveling the twisted threads of this case, we arrive at the moment everything changed, the 2017 press conference. This was when the truth that had eluded investigators for decades was finally laid bare, revealing the unimaginable horror behind the Bear Brook murders. In 2017, a room filled with reporters fell silent as Jeff Strelzin, a prosecutor with the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, took the stage. The air was heavy with anticipation. Over the next hour and a half, the investigators unfolded a twisted web of stories spanning decades and states. First, the Bear Brook murders in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Second, the murder of Yoon Jun in Richmond, California. Third, the abandonment of 5-year-old Lisa in Scotts Valley, California. Fourth, the disappearance of Denise Bowden, Lisa's mother, from Manchester, New Hampshire. Each of these cases seemed like an isolated tragedy, but the final story tied them all together, connecting everything to the Bear Brook murders. The final revelation during the press conference was about the man who had brutally murdered the Bear Brook victims, whose remains were found in barrels. Police had finally uncovered his name, or rather his many names: Bob Evans, Curtis Kimball, Gerald Mockerman, Larry Vanner, whatever you wanted to call him.
Bob Evans is not only connected to Denise Bowden's disappearance and the California murder of Yoon Jun, he's also connected to the 4 Allenstown murder victims. Through DNA testing, we've determined that this man, this killer, Bob Evans, is the father of the middle child victim in Allenstown, this young girl. He is not the father or related to the other victims, but he is in fact the father of this middle child victim. He's also the last person we know who was with Denise Bowden and her daughter Lisa in 1991, and we know he's the man who murdered Yoon Jun in California in 2002. Based on those connections and the additional work that we've done and the evidence we've gathered, we're confident that Bob Evans is the person who killed the 4 victims in Allenstown. We have concerns about the mother of that middle child and believe she may be dead as well. And we believe that he killed Denise Bowden somewhere between New Hampshire and California. We believe that Bob Evans likely killed all those people and that his killing finally came to an end in California in 2002 with his last victim, Yoon Sun Jun. So to summarize, we believe we have our killer of the Allenstown victims and of Denise Bowden. Now we need to try to identify and find all of his victims.
At this point, the police gave him a chilling title, the Chameleon Killer, a serial killer. Why Chameleon? The name itself suggested his mastery at changing identities seamlessly, much like a chameleon changes its colors. The breakthrough that tied the Chameleon Killer to the Bear Brook victims from the murders of Yoon Sun Jun and Denise Bowden came during the investigation into Lisa's identity. Sorting through 25,000 potential DNA matches was an arduous task, but persistence paid off. Investigators identified a key relative, Lisa's maternal grandfather. When they visited him, the story began to unfold. The last time he had seen his daughter, Denise Bowden, and her 6-month-old baby Dawn, later known as Lisa, was on Thanksgiving in 1981. Denise had introduced them to her boyfriend, a man named Bob Evans. Much to our surprise, when cops showed a mugshot of Chameleon to Lisa's grandfather, he knew him as Bob Evans. Shortly after, Denise, her daughter, and Evans disappeared. Shockingly, Denise's family never reported her missing. For decades, they believed she had chosen to cut ties and move on. But as investigators pieced together the timeline, it became evident that Denise had vanished without a trace, and Evans, now identified as Curtis Kimball, was the prime suspect. Denise Bowden's fate remains unknown. Investigators launched a missing person report in her name more than 30 years after her disappearance. Then, a case manager at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, in Alexandria, Virginia, noticed something. NCMEC had been involved with Lisa and her mother's case, and as they learned Lisa had been taken from New Hampshire, the case manager looked at a map. Manchester, where Denise Bowden was last seen, was only about 25 minutes from Bear Brook State Park, the site of another case NCMEC had worked on. The case manager checked the dates again. Denise disappeared in 1981. The first barrel was discovered in 1985. Initially, investigators wondered if Denise Bowden might be the adult victim from the first barrel, as they never found her body, but DNA testing ruled that out. When that test came back negative, they conducted another test, this time using the DNA of Bob Evans' Chameleon. This was the moment when everything came together. The DNA test revealed that the middle child victim, a 3-year-old girl, was Bob Evans, or Chameleon's biological daughter. The same girl whose isotope testing was different, same girl who was totally unrelated to the other victims of the barrels. And we already know that the adult woman and 2 of the children were maternally related, likely a mother and her daughters. This discovery confirmed that Bob Evans, also known as Curtis Kimball, Larry Vanner, and more, was behind the Bear Brook murders. Now comes the hard part. By the time this DNA test came back, Chameleon had already been dead for 7 years. He had died in 2010 in prison from lung cancer and pneumonia while serving a 15-year sentence for the murder of Yoon Sun Jun. Investigators would never get the chance to question him about the Bear Brook case. Now you could say 2 things. Either the Chameleon Killer got off the hook easy by dying, or perhaps God himself wanted to pass judgment on him due to the severity and brutality of his mass crimes. To sum it all up, his psyche reveals a deeply manipulative and coldly calculative individual, driven by an insatiable need for control and anonymity. His ability to seamlessly adopt new identities suggests not only a cunning intellect, which is uncommon in most serial killers, but also an alarming lack of genuine attachment to others. What's most disturbing is his capacity to mimic normalcy, presenting himself as a partner, father, or friend, while harboring unimaginable brutality beneath the surface. This duality makes him not just a criminal, but a chilling enigma whose motivations likely stem from a blend of narcissism, sociopathy, and an almost pathological fear of being truly known.
It's something that we all hope for, and it's something that Denise's daughter, Lisa, hopes for as well. She is a victim in this case. She has gone on to have a good life, and she's grateful for everything that's been done on her behalf. And she sent us a message, and she asked us to read it to you here today, and I'll read it to you now. I am so thankful to be reunited with my grandfather and cousins after all these years. I want to send out a heartfelt thank you to all the organizations and tireless individuals who made this possible. As a victim in this incredulous story, I would like to ask that the media respects my privacy. Currently, I have 3 beautiful children and a loving husband, and would like our presently happy and secure life to remain intact and protected through the release of this story. Please turn your focus toward the unidentified victims and other potentially unknown victims in this case, and hopefully their families will also be offered some closure as this investigation continues. Thank you, Lisa. And we obviously echo her hopes and wishes as well.
That's all for today, but this case is far from over. Another episode, The Bear Brook Murders Part 2, The Identities, will be out in 3 to 4 days. In it, we'll dive deeper into the identities of the Bear Brook victims and the Chameleon Killer himself. Remember, I haven't revealed his real name yet, or what his life was like before he began his twisted path of crime. Like us, he had a family once. In the next video, we'll uncover the chilling biography of the man who lived many lives under countless identities. We'll also learn about the victims, who had families and lives of their own, tragically cut short. This case has drained me. It took nearly 20 days to create this video. To make it as authentic as possible, I've ensured every detail is accurate. I searched across Wikipedia, Reddit, and even listened to 4 hours of podcasts related to this case, twice, just to deliver the story perfectly. So if you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing your reviews in the comments. Stay tuned.